Good morning from South Louisiana. It has been a long week of travel, but man, it's so good to sit on my front porch and drink a cup of coffee and really introduce you guys to our just very awesome guests that we're having on our show today. So, guys, if you don't know, because you've clicked on this video and you're like, where did I end up? You are on the sales journey, and I am your host, Matt Bro. And our special guest for this episode is Jodie Heggelund. Jodie Heggelund brings 20 years of experience as a sales professional, sales leader, and marketing guru within the medical device industry. So I am extremely excited to have him join us for our conversation today. Now, there's a lot of things that stick out to me and impress me about Jodie, but there are two specific things about his background that I really love. He has served in our Marine Reserve Corps and also as a volunteer firefighter. So for me, as I talk to him, it just makes complete sense that the things that stick out to me are that he is a servant leader at heart, and he is willing to do the things that a lot of us are not willing to do. So guys, in this conversation, we really jump into and get deep in three specific areas. We jump into relationships and the power of relationships can have in both a really good way and also not in such good ways. We also dig into authenticity and how that authenticity today with things like social media and that kind of stuff really are kind of fleeting at times and can leave you feeling exposed, and how important it is as you're driving those relationships. And then at the end of the day, we get into some hard lessons, some things that Jodie's experienced, some things that Jodie has come up against, and I know that this conversation is going to bring tremendous value. So guys, get out your notes, get out your pen and paper, really lean in and listen here. Jodie brings a wealth of knowledge and a wealth of success to help you along in your journey. So guys, let's get to it. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the Sales Journey. I'm your host, Matt Bro, and I am excited to have Mr. Jodie Heggelund with us this afternoon, really for a great conversation. And as I talked about in the intro, Jodie brings a ton of just experience in the business space, in the sales space, really from a sales leadership lens. And I'm just excited to have you on the podcast today, man.
I'm glad to be here. Thanks for having me on.
Awesome, man. So I know you and I have been having some conversations about getting you on here for a little while. And, you know, the whole intent here is that we really want to have conversation around the journey that you've had so far, really the big lessons that you've learned. And the key here is that we're going to come back to you probably 6 months, a year later, and talk about your journey up to that point. Because I think all too often, you know, we're talking, or there's interviews talking to millionaires, they're talking to the folks with the Lambos and the boats, and dude, we love it. And I love the classic car you've got. We'll get to that in a little bit. But at the end of the day, I think that there is a ton of value that can be had in the middle of that journey. So I certainly appreciate you giving us some time here and really spending some time and talking.
Yeah, I'm happy to share my story. And, you know, before we get started, I just want to say I'm really glad we were able to connect through, you know, our professional network. And I'm fairly confident that'll transcend and we'll move that into a personal network as well.
Absolutely, brother. Absolutely, man. So to kind of kick us off, you know, tell us a little bit about what has led to this stage of your life, kind of where you're sitting right now.
You know, it's interesting. As I kind of look at this, and as we talked, and you kind of gave me some things that you wanted me to think about for, you know, how to connect with the audience. As I look back and thought about this, you know, for a long time, what really defined me more than anything was my work and my professionalism and my drive in that. And, you know, so my journey to get me here has been a lot of things I've learned the hard way. The wrong way some cases, and some successes along the way. made some personal sacrifices. You might argue that I made a few too many in my personal life to see my professional life succeed. But I've since kind of come full circle on that. And we'll talk a little bit more about that. But, knowing that I've come full circle and been able to really, put the emphasis and the priority where it belongs for the appropriate timing. And my personal life is kind of take a front seat just as much as my professional, given the right time, given the right drive, if you will. But, what's gotten me here, the long way around to answer your question, what's gotten me here is, I started off my career really young. I had a family before I, really had a job or an income. So it's amazing what responsibility and accountability does to your immediate drive to, okay, I can't fail. Right. And so that was the mindset early on, is this idea that failure was not an option. Part of that was instilled in me from my grandfather. He was kind of an old school, hard guy. And, so some of those values came from there. But, pushing me into the last 20 years of my career, it's been an amazing journey of, leveraging things, of learning things, more so learning things than leveraging things, but just developing myself and developing my skills and helping to develop the people around me. That's what's gotten me here today.
That's awesome, man. So I kind of heard like two big themes in that. And the first one, like I can completely sympathize, like the back against the wall, there's no choice. Like I've got a family, I've got to go out and execute and really work hard. The second piece, and I really would love for some perspective, or maybe that moment where that kind of came out, was you mentioned, really the focus on the professional side of things. And sometimes almost to some expense of the personal side of things, but that has kind of shifted for you now. So like, was there a moment or a time where that just kind of that clarity of, I need the personal to also be humming along with my professional side of things?
It's interesting. Yeah. So there's been a few points where that's come along, and through any journey, there's cycles, right? So you're going to have your cycles where you're going up and everything is going fine. And my cycle seemed to be when my professional world was going great. My personal world was kind of on the down angle. And then there's been times where they've been in sync, where things have been really good. The precipice, though, of when it came to me that the personal really needed to take, the front seat or the side seat, right? That I needed to value them equally was probably about 10 years ago. I went through a divorce and really changed kind of my lifestyle, but also changed my mindset on things that I had been overlooking and things that I needed to prioritize. And that precipice and that genesis, or at that point became a genesis of, okay, now I've been so focused on this that my family life suffered. And I'm not perfect still today. And there's a lot that would say that I'm still learning, and we always have to be learning, but
all of us are, man.
That became the trigger. And I kind of had to take a step back multiple times in the last 10 years to figure out where that balance needed to rest. Not only in my professional career, but also my personal relationships with my children, my significant other, my new significant other. So those things, that was really the emphasis. At the same time that happened, and this was the 1-2 punch. At the same time that happened, the company I was working for and the guy who was my boss gave me indication that his boss didn't necessarily appreciate my work. So it kind of put that fear in there. Hey, I might not have my job in 30 days or 60 days.
Wow.
And so not only did I go through a personal change, but within just a few months, I went through a professional change and had to kind of take a couple steps back. I went from sales and sales management back into a marketing role. And at that point, I decided, okay, well, what do I do? Right? How do I make sure this doesn't happen again? And that's when I decided to go back and get my MBA at the same time. So a moment of challenge basically drove me into a moment of opportunity that I had to seize. It was a decision that I had to make some decisions and some changes to be able to do those things. But that was the genesis. That was the precipice of that moment where you figure out, it can't just be one-sided. It can't be your only focus, because if you as an individual aren't happy, that will show in your work. And it may sound cliche, but that's the reality. We live it every day, and people can see that, and they can sense that.
Yeah, I think all too often we try to show up as like the professional version of ourselves, and then at home we're maybe the personal version of ourselves. And it is a balance depending on kind of how you look at that. But bringing your whole self to all things like that is it's cool to hear that, 10 years back, not cool, because I'm sure in the middle of it you were like, that's not so cool, but the things crumbled around you, and ultimately what came out of it was a different perspective of a person, a different way of looking at life. And I think if you're listening to this interview right now, or you're listening to this conversation, you might be in the middle of things falling around you, like it might be just falling completely apart, and realizing that there's some big lessons in there that can take you in a much different direction that give you some fulfillment. So
absolutely,
that's very cool, man. I appreciate you sharing. And it's always cool to kind of hear what is, kind of set the foundation for where you're at today and what you're all about. So I know, when we were talking, really wanted to kind of get into during this conversation, the hallmark of these conversations is really around what are the big lessons you've learned in your journey so far? What are the things that have had the largest impact on you personally, professionally, what have you? Whoever's, Jodie at the end of the day. And I know you had some really great thoughts around that. So if you had to name the one thing that you feel like has the biggest impact, what is it and why?
I started my career very early on. I graduated college in 99 and really started working in around the 2000 area, 2000 year. And I was very lucky by happenstance to get into medical device. From a sales, marketing, and I actually started in finance. So not on the provider side, but from the medical device side. And, that's kind of early on in your career, and you can relate to this, I think everyone can. Early on in your career, you're young, you're hungry, you're aggressive. Not everyone has a chip on their shoulder. I kind of had that chip, right? I mean, we talked about this earlier. I had purpose and a family that I needed to provide for before I even started my career. So that was a driver for me and a motivation. And then also, just having, my model, my hero and the guy I looked up to, and my grandfather, was very successful in his career. And I wanted to be like him. I wanted to be just as successful. And so early on in the career, it's just, you're playing with fire. I mean, you're a kerosene and you're jumping around in it and you're just doing whatever they ask you to do. Right. And you kind of stumble around, and then once you find your skill set and once you find your groove, then it becomes what valuable lessons are you taking with you? And how is that going to mold who you become? And how's that going to impact not just yourself, but the people around you in your professional circles and in your personal circles as well. And the big thing for me, and I was very fortunate to learn this early on, was the power and the value of creating a strong and vast network, a network of people, a network of mentors, both in your professional and personal. And we'll talk about it a little bit more, but the professional and the personal will blend, right? If you're doing it right over time, and we'll talk about some of the things that drive that with being true to yourself and authentic, those things will blend. But the number one thing that I have found has helped me the most in my career, and somewhat defines me to a high degree as well, is the network that I've built, not just in medical device, but in other industries and other segments. And it's all personal driven, and also professionally driven as well. But that's the number one thing: the power of your network and the people that are in that network and bridging people in those things.
Right. So, I know, and I mean, that's phenomenal. And I would agree 100%. I mean, you hear the cliched term, like you're the sum of the five closest people to you, and who you relate to, who you have conversation with, drive really how you look at life in general. So, when people say network, right, like grow your network, those types of things, that can mean many different things to different people. So talk to me early on. What has growing network for Jodie evolved? What were some of maybe the things that you learned that you do differently now than maybe you did early on as you were trying to, gain those relationships with other folks just around you?
Yeah. So early on, my idea of network, and this is funny, I'm glad you brought this up, but when I started off, I was a product manager in the corporate office. And my idea of network was memorizing 600 cell phone numbers for the sales reps in the field. And so, I mean, anytime a number would come across, we'd figure out who it was before we answered the phone.
You were like the human caller ID back then.
Back then, that's what, I mean, it had to be here, right? I'm a little bit older now, so it's, I've only got 2 numbers stored in there. But so that was the thing, is when they called, we would answer the phone and address them by their first name. And to them, that was impressive. Even though I was in marketing, and no matter what you're doing, you're really in customer service, right? If you're in business, you provide a service.
Right.
And it's how you do that. So my idea of network early on was just all the sales reps in the field. And like, man, I want to be those guys. I want to be in the field, and how do I work my way to get there? But that was my network early on, was knowing all the reps, being familiar with their business. And then inside the office, it was the 2 people I worked closely with and the gentleman that we reported to. He was a young, aggressive guy as well. And, just kind of modeling my behavior after him and, the things that he had learned. So he kind of, I don't want to say he was my first mentor, because I'll talk about who my first mentor was. Same company, different division, but a little bit further on in the career, right? Where your EQ kind of comes up and you've got a couple years under your belt. And that's when you realize, okay, I do have aspirations to move up, and there are things that I want to go towards. But you may not have the skills or the knowledge on how to get there. And that's where identifying that mentor comes in. Some companies they'll have a mentorship program. The company I was working for didn't at the time. So you kind of had to go out and say, hey, I like you. I respect you.
Right.
How did you get there? And can you teach me? Can you pull me under your wing and help me move my career in the same fashion that you moved yours? And that kind of leads into the next point, from early network into the next phase of the network, where you're identifying colleagues and mentors that you do want to bring closer into your circle, or your circle of 5, right? Because then you start establishing that identity of your own, but also the identity of, the collective, right?
Right. So talk to me a little bit about, like, when you say identity, what does that mean?
Well, it's interesting. You are who you are, right? You're Matt Bro. I'm Jodie Heggelund. But it's that identity of when you're with a group of people, and I'm going to talk about this professionally. Professionally, when you're around a group of people, the behaviors, the things that you strive for, and I hate using the word group think, because that's always has a negative connotation, but it's that identity becomes, what is your value, not just to the people around you, but then your value within that circle, and then that identity. So that's what I was talking about with identity. It's just, are you setting yourself apart? Is it a good identity or brand, if you will? But are you the person and or group of people that we want to associate with, that we can rely on, that we trust, that we know are going to help us not only move our careers along, but also that we can rely on that they're going to do what's right overall for themselves and for us. So early on during that transition, it became, young, aggressive, I forget the terminology, high achiever. Right. And then it became, kind of that Johnny on the spot. If anybody ever asked me for something, I had it right away. And that comes from preparation. That comes from drive and determination. It's not just a happenstance thing. This is intentional. You have to want to drive yourself forward and constantly challenge yourself and look for ways that you can, one, build your identity, because those behaviors are essentially your identity. but
Right.
the way people see you, that's your identity. Some good, some bad, and you have to, refine that and polish it.
Absolutely. So I kind of heard, networking originally was just trying to build some rapport, trying to um, make people feel comfortable, right? Create some trust, confidence in who you were. You were aggressive, so really building that network of people that can build you and make you better. I mean,
Mm-hmm.
ultimately, at the end of the day, um, as you've as you've kind of matured in your career and gotten into different roles, and now as a sales leader in your business, how has networking evolved for you?
It is. It's kind of the benchmark for where I'm at. Um, so early on, I was with a company and I worked for them for almost 9 years in medical device. I started in finance, moved to marketing, moved into higher marketing roles, was promoted throughout, then moved into sales, was promoted very quickly throughout sales, became an area manager. And then after that, I moved companies around. So the evolution from then to now and the idea of what my network is actually started back then. Some of this very same people whose cell phone number I had memorized, and I couldn't tell you what it was now, but some of those same people in field sales, distributor principals that I looked up to and admired because they had created something. They created their business, right? I still talk to them today. They still call me today. I can still call them, right? Because we're still in the same industry. Some have moved on and gone away and some have come back, but that's the evolution of it, is some of those initial people, I gave them the right mindset or I gave them the right impression. I became trustworthy and reliable in their minds, worked my career and became that same thing for others. And it's expanded that network. And so the beauty of it really is that those same people that I was aspiring to be, and I would assume anyone that's in sales and trying to work their way up, the people you're looking up to and you're aspiring to be, you're going to do it your own way. But the hope and the goal is that you leave the same path for other people behind you to say, I want to do it like he did, right?
Mm-hmm.
And then you can look back and say, hey, I remember exactly what it feels like to be in your situation. But the network now it's so much more than a professional network. We talked about this earlier, but I did a transition point in my career where I changed divisions within the same company. And it was at that point that I was able to meet with and kind of foster my first mentor relationship. And, he recognized that early on, and I was grateful for that. And he said, you are young, you're aggressive, you're smart, you're quick, you're good with technology. Again, this is when BlackBerries were around, right? So
Right.
this is when we made the move from, the Nokia brick to a BlackBerry. And, so some of those things are important. And coming from finance and having the business degree and knowing Excel and formulas and PowerPoint and those things. And he said, what do you want to do? And I said, well, I want to get a promotion. I want to get a raise. He says, no, that's 6 months. It's 12 months. He says, where do you want to end up? And it was the first time that anyone had really asked me that. And I knew, I thought I was young and aggressive. I'm going to be CEO and this, of a company. But I really took a step back and I said, this was about 7 years into my career at this point.
Mm-hmm.
And I said, and it's sad that I had to wait 7 years to get a good mentor, but it was probably better for me because I had a mentor early on. When you're young and aggressive, you do tend to leave a few bodies in the wake. And, so I had to take a step back and I said, based on what I know of my skill sets and what I've seen other people be able to do, my goal at that point was I want to be a VP or president of both marketing and sales. I want to run the commercial side of a business. And he said, well, there's a problem. And I said, what's that? He goes, you don't have any sales experience. And so that mentorship, that conversation, and I still remember it to this day. And the gentleman, he's still my mentor. We still talk on a weekly basis. And I don't know if I can say his name, but I'll say it, but it's Kevin McCallum. I remember the conversation so clearly. And he said, that's what you want to do. You can get there. You got to go sell the bag. And, he was at a director level, and he started talking to me about when he went into sales for that very same purpose.
Right.
And within 5 months, I got kicked out of marketing, rolled into an associate sales rep position to go and carry the bag. And then they said, the challenge will be, once you go into sales, it'll be really tough to come back into a corporate environment.
Right.
And they're like, you may not ever make it back, because once you go into sales, because of your personality, you're very gregarious, you may never make it back, but it doesn't matter. You're going to be wildly successful no matter what you do.
Right.
And that was an amazing point. That was the inflection point early in my career, before some of the things started to crash around me.
Right. Well, like questions come into my brain, and certainly if you get a perspective, if not, that's fine. But like, as you're talking about your network and you're talking about these folks that you've worked with, it's almost like you have an innate ability to recognize those people.
Mm-hmm.
But there's a lot of people that don't have that ability, right? So I guess talk to me, like, how do you recognize the people that you don't want to network with? Like, you don't need that. How do you recognize that before you get so deep that it's hard? I think a lot of people many times get kind of stuck into some of these relationships that it almost feeds toxic thought. It doesn't help build where they want to go ultimately.
Yeah. Well, Matt, the reality is anyone will be in their career, and you will have to work with someone that you don't necessarily like. And you may not realize it on the front end. Like you were saying, you may get engaged and be part of a network of people or an individual that may not be the best thing for your individual brand or your identity and the things that you're trying to do. And avoidance is one thing, but if you find yourself in that situation, you really kind of have to take a step back, because whether you realize it or not, if you can see negativity, whether it's toxic or whether it's unethical behavior, or just someone that doesn't do it right, or in a manner that you don't necessarily agree with, right? You have to be able to make that change, and it takes courage. And it may not be a change that you're comfortable with. And this goes back to one of the things that we talked about earlier. You have to know your core self. You have to know your core values, and you have to be authentic to that. And I've read books on that, and I get off on the leadership and leadership development things, but you may not recognize it right away. And if you can, that's great, because you can do some things and you can put some barricades in place, if you will, to avoid some of those things. But you can't always recognize it. And there was a situation. I'll tell you a quick story. I was in a relationship, or a professional relationship. I had a colleague of mine, and there were some signs. There were some signs that they may not be the best person to associate with. But he was my colleague. He was at my level. And the relationship developed over the period of 1.5 years. That relationship changed, and that person became my boss. And it was at that point, that inflection point, where some of the things that I had seen and some of the things that I had heard came to fruition in that negative sense. And it was almost like a switch. And, once that individual came into a position of power, it really changed the dynamics of the organization. It changed the dynamics of the working relationships. And it ended up very bad, not just for me, but for him as well. But I had to make a tough decision. And there were things that I had to do to go into protection mode and avoidance of that. Luckily for me, I've had very few of those. But you're right. I mean, there may be some instances where you are attached to someone within your network, whether closely attached or just distantly attached. You have to make that conscious choice. You have to make sure that not only are you doing the things that you know are right and true and ethical and that make you feel good as a person, and drive you forward, but you also have to surround yourself with those people as well.
Right. And you bring up a good point. Like, so, being your true authentic self, knowing your core values, early in career, right? Like early on in your journey, maybe you didn't have that self-awareness. Like,
oh, absolutely not.
right. Like, it's something that you develop over time. But what would you say to that person where, you know, like if I'm listening to you talk about like core values, like I'm sitting going like, what is my core values? Like,
Hmm.
what am I really like? What makes me me?
Hmm.
Um, what advice would you give maybe that person?
We alluded to this a couple times that um, no matter professional world or personal world, you should always be growing,
Right.
challenging yourself.
Yep.
Um, and you're absolutely right. I would argue that anyone that is young in their career or is right out of college, they may know their core values as an individual, but maybe not their core values in their professional. And if you do, and if you happen to have that clarity early on, use it and leverage it in appropriate ways. But if you don't, you're absolutely right. You learn that through experience. Um, that's why a lot of the MBA programs, they don't take people that have less than 7 or 5 years of professional working experience, because they want you to have that experience. They want you to have had challenges. They want you to have established those core values. And those core values come about, one, in your personal life, right?
Mm-hmm.
You could have ways that you have core values that are developed for you early on in childhood, and they will carry forward into your adult life. But professionally, those core values don't really come into play until you're tested, until you find success, or until you find failure, or both,
Mm-hmm.
right? Because we can't win all the time.
Right.
And for a while, I'll tell you, I struggled with the word failure. I hated, like ever saying that I failed at something. The reality is we all fail at certain things. And that's been something that I've struggled with for years. And if people around me hear me say that, they're like, well, it's about time you admit that. But,
See, I
you
tell
know,
people I don't fail, I just learn.
that's,
That's all it is, man.
that's exactly it. I've seen that on a meme a time or two, but,
Yeah.
so the establishment of your core values, it comes at that point where you're able to, and I want to use the word balance, but when you're able to identify who you are, both in your personal life and who you are in your professional life, and they have to be in alignment, right? They have to be lockstep. Because if you have core values professionally that are in conflict with your core values personally,
Mm-hmm.
that's going to end in a disaster, right?
Right.
We talked about the network, and let me tell you why. We talk about our network. Your professional network, over time, if you're authentic, will transcend and become a personal network. The best sales relationships will, they will turn into some of the best personal friendships. I know guys that were sales reps, and their ultimate customers, they spend weekends together, they go hunting together, and that's the thing. But if your core values on one side of your life and your professional are not in alignment with your personal, you're going to put yourself into an unethical situation. You're going to come into conflict. You're going to be lying to yourself about what your intentions really are. And ultimately, you talk about this on the podcast, is what drives you to success, what drives you to that next level. And if they're not in alignment, you could be wildly successful in work, but horribly miserable in your personal life. And that's not living. That's not working. That's not living.
And I agree. I think it brings up a good point, because I mean, people talk about like work-life balance. I talked about that with Derek on a
Mm-hmm.
previous conversation. But even like balance almost feels like you're two different people. Like I'm having to balance things because I'm this version of me versus this version of me.
Yeah.
And what you're talking about is one can be more professional maybe, but the thing that ties that foundation together is the core values. And
Mm-hmm.
also what I hear, and I mean, this has been true for me, is those values evolve over time.
Absolutely.
My values as a 20-something-year-old was much different than a father
Yeah.
and a husband, right? My
So,
values.
so at 23, you probably valued your bank account balance a lot,
I
right?
still
Because that was,
value that.
yeah,
I still
well,
value
absolutely. But that was a main driver for you.
right.
Now, that's an important thing for you now, but the
Yeah.
driver for that
It's
is
based on other things.
based on other things, right?
100%.
So core values do shift and they evolve over time. Essentially, what happens is your core values mature, just as you do.
Right. And I think, if I'm the 20 something year old that, or even the 30, I mean, shoot, like the 35, 40-year old that is, they feel their values shifting. Right.
Hmm.
And it creates this conflict all of a sudden. Like there's this internal conflict between what you've been doing for the last, 15, 20 years professionally, maybe,
Hmm.
or personal. And all of a sudden those values shift. It's how do you keep them together? And I think it's that network, man. I like what I'm thinking about is like how many folks that you encounter early on that you can actually take through life along is a much smaller group, because there's so much evolution that goes with that. There's some people that are going to be a part of your world for this season of life,
Hmm.
and taking them into the other season can actually hurt you,
Yeah.
right? And
Well,
it can hurt
we talked
them.
about that earlier. So
Yeah.
there is, yeah, and the people that do stay with you,
Mhm.
like my mentor, and several others, those people that do stay with you are also the ones that will give you those gut checks throughout different points. And they're like, hey, I don't think this is the right path for you, or are you sure you want to do this? Or, hey, this is perfect for you, right? So
Right.
that guidance along the way, and you establish that through your network. You've got those core individuals, um, you know, that are basically within your circle. And Kevin's now retired out of medical device, but we talk, like I said, every week, and
Well,
he'll
and
call me.
he knows the real you,
Yeah,
right? So
that's exactly it.
he has the ability to say, like, "Are you sure that's you?" Right?
Yeah. Well,
So,
and let me say this:
mhm.
a network isn't. Listen, a true network, right? Those true connections. That's not a social media following, right? Doing business with someone doesn't make them a connection. Doesn't make them a true valuable person within your network, right? Because we can do business with everyone. I do business at the grocery store, right? that
Mhm.
doesn't that doesn't mean we're in the same network. Yeah, we're all human peoples and we're on this earth together. But what I'm talking about is not social media following. I'm talking about true connections within your network, people that know you and you know them,
Mm.
not just for the job they're doing, but who they are as a person, what they represent, their families, what are the things they like doing outside of that, what are their goals and aspirations. True connections and understanding them and how they impact both your personal and your professional life. Not um, Joe Schmo who followed me on Instagram because he liked my car. That's
Right.
not in my network.
Yeah, absolutely. And I'll tell you, your car is pretty badass. So, I mean, I've seen. I'm like, wow. I
I'll tell
wish.
you what. So when we do this, I'll send you a picture and you'll have to flash it up on the snippet that comes up.
We're gonna definitely have to do that. Back on that topic, because I think it's such a good point that your social media following is not necessarily your network. So how do you? And honestly, I believe that we're just using the tool wrong.
Hmm.
Like people say social media is disconnecting us in a more connected world. And that's because people are using that tool wrong. Like I'm connected to Jodie only because of social media. If social
Hmm.
media wasn't around, you and I probably would have never crossed paths unless we're sitting next to each other in an airplane,
Yep. Yep.
right? Because your spouse is going to challenge you to have a conversation with me, right?
Who did you sit next to, right? What do
Right?
they do? What's their life story? Yeah, it happens all the time.
Exactly. So using the tool to say like, hey, we connected, but literally I want to engage and have a conversation and learn a little bit about you.
Hmm.
I think we're actually living in a world where our social media following is just so underutilized.
Hmm.
You can be so much more connected, networked. You could learn so much from that group of folks. The problem is we just don't engage as much.
Yeah. Well, I mean, this is a whole host of other issues, and I agree with you. I mean, we don't leverage it in the appropriate ways, but you can, right? It's a mindset.
Mm,
If you do want to leverage the network, and you could do it from a simple business standpoint and advertising, but I mean, you can also be very mindful of the people you allow into your network, whether that's your professional network, whether that's your social network. You didn't have to allow me into your network. There was a joint cause, if you will, or a mutual friend
right.
there within
Yeah.
Derek.
Mhm.
So that worked out well. So you said, okay, well, if he knows Derek, then I may take the chance and I'll see what this guy's about. Luckily, here we are today, and this is probably the fifth conversation we've had over the last couple of weeks, and this won't be the last.
Good.
And that's how using a social media or a social network can benefit you. And there's so many ways to be able to leverage that. LinkedIn, I use LinkedIn a lot, not only for news, but also for recruiting purposes.
Mhm.
Keeping up with, what the competitors are doing, whether or not they're recruiting and, what's new. So it's how you leverage those things and take advantage of it. It's another tool. It's another resource. But you're absolutely right, though. I mean, just because you're connected on LinkedIn, or just because you're connected on Instagram or Facebook or whatever social media platform is, it doesn't make it a true connection. That's up to you to drive the value and or determine or discover if there's value there.
And
So,
it's interesting because people think it's a social media issue. Like before social media came along, like you would go to, let's say you go to a trade show or you go to a big conference, right?
mhm,
And you can get business cards all day long and have a stack of them. But if you don't
mhm,
ever have a real human to human depth of conversation in that event or that experience, you didn't truly network. It's
yeah,
very similar in that way. Like you can open up the phone book and identify anybody you want to talk to. You can know their
that's
phone
right.
numbers, right? But without the human to human, no technology has replaced that. It's just people think that number on their profile means something nowadays.
No,
So
and you're absolutely right. You cannot, there is nothing to replace the interpersonal. Now, technology gives us ways to have interpersonal connections without actually having to be face to face, right? I
yeah,
mean, if we were in the same room, this would be a wide angle lens camera, and
right.
we'd set the decorations a little bit differently. But this is still interpersonal,
Yeah.
right? And the phone calls and the emails leading up to this and getting to know each other, and 50-50 of it was based on this, and 50-50 was based on just getting to know each other.
Right.
You cannot replace or remove the interpersonal. Um,
100%.
it's what drives us as humans.
Wow. So if you have been listening to this conversation, I know for a fact that you are just getting a tremendous amount of value. The things that stick out to me, at least in this conversation, that I hope really impact you as you're listening, like I would say the big thing that sticks out to me, if I had to pick one, that would be really the alignment of yourself, the true authentic self, and the relationships that you have. So what that means to me is if you want to be a more caring individual, and that is who you are, then your relationships and how you interact with those relationships and your work life and those types of things should be in alignment with it. And what I love about Jodie is that he's had several experiences where his internal values, his core values really lined up with the work that he's doing, and there's been experiences where those core values didn't line up with that work. And he had to make tough choices, quite honestly, to really make some very courageous changes to make sure that his true self aligned up with the professional work that he was doing. And honestly, in this day and age of social media, and I know there's folks talking about this, so it's nothing new, but in this age of social media, things are becoming more transparent. Now, there's a lot of posers out there. There's a lot of people posting things and trying to provide an image or a brand of themselves that's not reality. And this has been going on long before social media ever came about. I mean, the imposters and con artists and those types of things. But it's becoming more rampant because it's just so easy. But the challenge is as you go down your journey, as you go 10, 20, 15, however many years down the road, not being authentic can lead to a ton of unhappiness. I've experienced in my life where I really had to take inventory of what I value and what my core values are and make some hard choices. More of that to come in other episodes, and I will be sharing my journey more and more. But I just wanted to share a couple of reflection points. We're going to jump back into the conversation and kind of dig into some gratitude and just what's coming up for Jodie, so you can learn a little bit more about him and this high quality individual.
So, as we kind of wrap this thing up, Jodie, what are you most grateful for and why? And the reason why I like to ask this question is for our viewers out there, really taking time and reflecting on what we're grateful for just kind of puts us in the right spot, puts us in my thought process, it puts us in a position or a posture of offense in life, right? Mm-hmm. When you're grateful and thankful for whatever behind you, whatever's in front of you, it changes the way that we think. So mm-hmm. I would love it if you would share just kind of what you're grateful for and thankful for.
Number one, I'm grateful for the people that surround me. I'm a bit of a driver. I'm a bit set in my ways. And people get to learn that about you. One of my best friends, that he's been one of my friends since childhood. He lives in the Dallas area as well. I'm in the Dallas area. And we'll joke all the time, and he'll joke with my fiance and be like, yeah, that's Jodie. But that's the reality. Is I'm grateful for having that group of friends. I'm grateful for the my family, without a doubt. And I'm grateful for the ability to not just do my job, but to have an impact and bring value beyond my job description, right? If we're talking about professionally, it's not just doing the job day to day. It's the connections with, I work in medical device, so we have donor services, we have national accounts and customer service and finance and marketing. All these groups that as a sales manager, you interact with, you rely on them for certain things within your job, but I've become close personal friends with many of them, and they're in Montana, right? They're several states away. And I'm grateful for that, because these people, whether or not they impact my life on a day-to-day basis, they do have an impact on my life. And I hope that I have an impact on theirs. You're talking about grateful. That's what I'm grateful for now. I'm really grateful for some of the things early on in my life, coming up. I was in band. I'll say that. And I'm very proud of that because it gave me exposure to being a part of something. For me, it was band. For many others, it's sports or, the chess team or soccer. But one, it gave me exposure to being a part of something bigger than myself. But at the same time, it put me on a stage, if you will. And it challenged me and put me in a place where I had to be my best at certain times. And it kind of took some of the fear and anticipation out of so many things that I've done in my career, right? Mm-hmm. That it gives you this confidence of, hey, I don't care if I'm in front of 3 people or 300 or 3,000. I'm going to get up there and make this presentation, or I'm going to do this sales training for these 30 reps that have been, some of them twice my age, right? It's having that confidence and knowing and believing in yourself. And I'm really grateful for that as well.
That's awesome, man. That's awesome. I love the depth of just the relationship piece of it for you. Like just being aware that it's not just a transactional type thing, just being present enough to say, I'm like really thankful for all of the relationships that the experiences have given me. And then really even going all the way back to an experience very, very early on that maybe shifted how you think about things. That's cool that you're able to kind of go back and connect that.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, we all, growing up, our childhood does shape and form us. Mm-hmm. And I, like I said, I was very privileged to have something that kind of thrust me into a position of leadership, but also thrust me into a position of kind of taking some of that fear away. And it suited me well. I think, knock on wood, I think it suited me well.
There's, and you bring up something that like, it suited you well. Like, right, we all have childhoods, and there's a lot of people that, you know, and for me, I would say there was probably a time where I looked at my childhood and didn't necessarily see it as the thing to be thankful for, right? And there's a lot of people I feel like are in that boat. But I think you bring up something that's interesting is that, I mean, it shapes us. It's who we are. Like if we were to say like, I wish I didn't do that, or I wish I wouldn't have been a part of that, I wish I wouldn't have experienced those things, like we wouldn't be the same person potentially.
You're exactly right.
Like you break it's like what is it, the butterfly effect? There was Ashton Kutcher did that video or that movie where, you know, he kind of went back and like started changing things, and when he
you change one thing, the ripple effect. Yeah.
And so, you know, I always think like, should we ever really regret some of the painful things, because the painful things shaped us just as much as the good times did, and sometimes the painful stuff shapes us more. Well, very cool, and I appreciate you sharing there. So, you know, it's kind of a look back, so looking forward a little bit.
Oh, here we go.
Yeah. So looking forward, you know, for Jodie, what's the future look like, man? What's the aspirations? What are the goals in the next, man, like a year? Like what for Jodie, what am I doing in the next year that just is, it's the one thing you got to get done?
I don't want to say something and seem like it's a cop out, but, you know, the way I do that is just, like I said, I've been very fortunate. I feel like I've hit my stride. And the way I do that is in my current organization is to continue to be where I'm at and continue to do the things that I know are the right things to do for the people. And then in my personal life, it's the same thing. It's just stay where I'm at, be present, and continue to be a positive influence, not just for my fiance or my children, but also my friends and my close circle. And, you know, I'd like to move some more people from my professional network into my personal network.
Right.
And we should always try to do those things. And just like anything else, like you said, there are going to be times when people are with you for a season or a certain job or a certain career, and those things will shift. So the way I do that, how do I do that in the next year? Man, I just got to be myself. I got to be true to who I am. And I got to remember that, you know, there are things that are important to me, but there are things that are important to so many other people around me. And humble myself, be present, and, you know, just do the things I know how to do.
Awesome, man. Awesome. I appreciate you letting me kind of back you up a little bit there, man.
Yeah. Made me uncomfortable. I like it.
That's it. Maybe I should rename the podcast to something about discomfort. Nah, man. So we've talked about a lot of things, right? So we have talked about the power of a network, how that network can evolve and change as your core values change. And then from a core value perspective, really talked about kind of self-awareness and how experiences give us the opportunity, and don't put so much pressure on ourselves, you know, to feel like you got to have self-awareness 100% nailed down, because I hear so many stories of people 15, 20 years into what they thought they were going to be, all of a sudden go, man, that is not who I am anymore. So really talked about that, and I think it's tremendously valuable, but a lot of content there. So like, what is the one thing, if, you know, the audience is listening to this interview, what is the one thing that you want to encourage people to do differently after hearing this conversation?
You know, everyone's journey is going to be unique to themselves. But the nugget, it's a challenge, right? It's understanding who you are, what your core values are, putting those in alignment with what you want professionally and personally. And it's that big alignment, right? And for me, my nugget, the thing that's made this possible, has been the network of people. I was fortunate enough to early on come into part of with a good network, some mentors along the way. I've had to remove some people from that, but it's that surrounding yourself with people who not only challenge you and push you, but also will celebrate in your successes, and be there to help pick you up when things are falling down around you. But don't ever give up on that. And so it's it's really, it's a combination of two things. It's your core values, it's being authentic self, and putting yourself in your network, and establishing a network that is in alignment with that. And that doesn't mean that your network is different or better than anyone else's, but you just have to know.
Yeah, it's true to you. It's got
That's
to be
exactly it. That's exactly it.
100%, man. Well, look, I appreciate, like just the willingness to jump on and have a conversation. I know some of the conversation, I mean, you got to kind of talk about things, right? Like not a lot of
Hmm.
people are just going to kind of jump on and put it out there. So I appreciate you willing to share your journey and some of the lessons and really wanting to make a bigger impact. You're already making strides to that goal this year of
Yeah.
making a bigger impact here. So I certainly appreciate that perspective. Tell the audience how to get a hold of you, man.
Yeah, absolutely. So I'm on LinkedIn from a professional standpoint. I've got a great network on there as well. I do a lot of recruiting on there. So if you are in sales and you're wanting to come into sales management, one, you're in the right place. You got a great host there with Matt. But man, I'm happy to share my experiences. I am thrilled to do whatever I can to help someone out, or even just help them network as well. But LinkedIn, you can find me on LinkedIn, Jodie Heggelund. I'm on there. If you're connected to Matt, you can get a connection to me as well. If you want to reach out directly, if you have a certain question or anything you want to learn a little bit more about through my journey, and if you think that can help you, be happy to have you email me as well. It's jody.heggelund@yahoo.com. Matt's going to throw it up for you. But yeah, feel free to reach out. I don't have my own Instagram. I do have an Instagram, but it's very, it's more personal, less professional. But I mean, it's got my car and my dog on there. But yeah, those are the two best ways to connect with me. And then and specifically, if you're in medical sales, I'd love to hear from you. And one of the things we talked about this earlier, and I don't want to get too long-winded here, but in my MBA program, I was very fortunate to interact with people in oil and gas, and telecom, and so many other industries that I now follow different aspects of different industries, because there's things I still want to learn about things outside of medical device. So even if you're not in medical device, if you're a sales, associate sales rep, district manager, or you want to work your way up, or if you want to challenge me, that's the good one too. Reach out, because I'm always learning, and I look forward to connecting with more. And then I also look forward to following Matt on his journey as well. So I got my eyes on you, and keep your eyes on me, and maybe we'll check back and hold each other accountable.
100%. And guys, you heard it from Jody. He wants to connect, man. He wants to make a bigger impact. And if you've got questions based off of this conversation, or you want some perspective, again, don't just connect on LinkedIn. Like literally shoot him a message, ask a question, engage, have a conversation. I can tell you tremendous amount of value that Jody can bring to you. You don't know the ripple effects of what that can actually bring. Like you just don't know what that is. So I can't urge you enough to just connect. So Jody, thank you again, man. I certainly appreciate the opportunity to just spend a little bit of time with you. Very much the same. I'm looking forward to continuing to just engage and learn from each other and follow each other as we kind of go down this path we call life, right?
Mm-hmm.
And any way that I can bring value, or any way, shape, or form, do not hesitate to reach out. So again, thank you for spending some time with us this afternoon.
Matt, thank you. This has been an absolute pleasure, and I look forward to connecting with you again soon.